See, I come from Indonesia, and as a lot of you may know, it's the most populated Muslim country in the world. So even though I was born into a Buddhist family, I grew up and I was raised in a very much Muslim environment. So when I say the word Islamophobia, it's a big word, though by definition and to break it down, it's really quite simple. Islamophobia, a phobia of Islam, a fear of Islam and therefore a fear of anyone associated to Islam. But when you look at the reality of things, Islamophobia is no longer just a fear. It's now a fear that has translated into hatred. It's a fear that has translated into deep resentment towards Islam and Muslims, often provoking violence and resulting in death. The reason Islamophobia is spreading so much is really quite simple. It's because of our association with Islam and terrorism, and in much the same way our association between Muslims and terrorists. But this really shouldn't be the case, because we've put a face where one shouldn't go. We've put a face onto terrorism. We've literally religiously profiled an entire category of criminals. And when you look at the core definition of the word terrorist, there is no mention of race or religion. In fact, what's interesting is when you look at the origin of the word terrorist, it was first used to describe French revolutionists who were fighting for democracy and equality. The word terrorist was first used to describe people who are fighting for what we are trying to defend today. So now we have to ask ourselves, why do we make this association? How did our definition of terrorist become so narrow? And when we ask ourselves that, a few things come to mind. The first things would be, of course, the terrorist groups. We start thinking about the IS, Al-Qaeda, the Boko Haram, and that's just naming a few. The next things would be the terrorist events. This include 9/11, Charlie Hebdo, countless of cases of bombings and genocide all around the world, from Yemen and Nigeria to Jakarta and Bali. But when you think a little bit deeper, that's not really true, is it? Because we have to dig a little bit further back. We have to start thinking about why we think about these cases long before we think about anything else. And the main root of it all is really the media. Because of the way the media has portrayed terrorism to us, has changed our definition of the word. Now, I'll use these two cases as an example. The Guardian wrote an article for each of them. On the top, it's titled The Woolwich Murder. What happened was 2 Muslim men shot down a veteran soldier in the UK who just returned from war. They did this in order to express their, and I say this very loosely, Islamist views. They felt that it was an obligation of their faith. So likewise, the word terrorist was mentioned 6 times, and the word terrorism was mentioned an additional 4 times. Now, the next case is the Holocaust Museum shooting. What happened was a man who had alleged links to the BNP, the British National Party, a very right-winged party, I might add, went to a public Holocaust memorial, expressed his views that the Holocaust is a conspiracy, the Holocaust is a hoax, and pulled out a gun while he was showing his deep hatred towards Jewish people, but yet somehow the word terrorist and terrorism were completely left out. And this continues to happen, article after article, newsfeed after newsfeed. The media has skewered the word terrorist into Islam in much the same way they've taken words and phrases from the Quran into terrorism. Like jihad, a jihadist, they say. And yes, of course, at one point in the Quran, the jihad did mean a holy war against non-believers. But in much the same way, we don't take Bible verses out of context and understand them in their most literal form. We can't take words and phrases from the Quran and define them by definitions that were set during a historical time of war and colonialism. A time when the very survival of your religion, the very survival of your people depended on the death of another's. Today, jihad is understood as an inner struggle, a war against yourself. For example, my jihad is to get better grades. Or my jihad is to spend more time with my family. It's the little obstacles that we have to overcome as everyday people in a modern society. So now I ask you, what should a terrorist look like then? Is it always a hooded figure waving around an AK-47? Is it always a group of men standing around a black flag with Arabic writing on it? And the answer to that is a lot simpler than we seem to want to accept, because a terrorist could look like anyone. In much the same way a robber could look like anyone, a burglar could look like anyone, a pickpocket could look like anyone, a murderer could look like anyone. And until we begin to realize this, until we begin to accept it, we can't comprehend just how bad Islamophobia has become. We can't even grasp just how severe and extreme the backlash Muslims have to face every day has become. This was an article posted less than 1 week after the Charlie Hebdo shootings. Now, 50 anti-Muslim cases were registered. This ranged from verbal harassment, physical harassment, murder, and vandalism to anything Islamic. Now, the Islamophobia there got so bad that they had to put heavily armed guards next to mosques just to protect the Muslims praying there during Friday prayers. In Dresden, Germany, 17,000 pinstripe Nazis marched for the sole purpose of going against Islam. This happened around the end of last year, near Christmas time, so in the holiday spirit, they felt that it would be a good idea to sing Christmas carols, but change the words to ask for the death of all Muslims. Change the words to ask for the eradication of Islam. And if that wasn't a blatant enough display of Islamophobia, a Moroccan man was killed in his own house while his wife and child managed to escape to the police, reporting that the man broke in the middle of the night and screamed, "I am your God, I am your Islam," before stabbing her husband 17 times. And what's worse to think of is that this ripple of Islamophobia, this ripple of ignorance has spread so much it's affecting those who aren't even Muslim. This was a peaceful protest in the US by Sikh Indians. They felt that they were being victimized by Islamophobic attacks when they're not even Muslim. Why? Because they had a turban on. Why? Because they had a beard. Why? Because their shade of brown was a little bit too Arabic, a little bit too Muslim. And what we always forget is how this affects our kids, how the societies and attitudes that we build today will affect the youth of tomorrow. So I'll just let this video by Zuka Media speak for itself.
Als jij zelf mocht kiezen, wat zou je dan willen worden? Een boef of een superheld?
Superheld.
Waar is jouw haar? Goed zo.
Ja, is dit een paard of een ezel?
Ezel.
Weet je wie ook zulk haar had, Jonas?
Ja?
Breivik had dat ook.
Die jongens in Parijs hadden ook een muts, hè? Die lijkt wel, kijk mis aan. Lijkt wel een beetje op die jongens.
Ik zeg ook steeds van, dat is niet zo. Maar ze blijven het denken.
Die meneer ging met pistolen, ging die jonge mensen op een zomerkamp doodschieten.
De meeste boeven zijn Marokkanen. In Parijs en in Syrië. Het zijn allemaal Marokkanen, moslims. En jij ziet er ook wel een beetje uit als een boefje. Eerlijk.
Ja.
Die lijken allemaal een beetje op jou. Die hebben bruin haar, die hebben bruine ogen.
Dus dan is het aan jou om dat tegen te spreken, toch?
Ik wil dat je 5 keer sorry zegt.
Sorry, sorry.
Zeg papa maar na, ik. Nee,
Nee.
afstand.
Afstand.
Van verschrikkelijke dingen.
Verschrikkelijke dingen. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Sorry. Van
Iedereen
iedereen.
met
Met
een
een
muts.
muts.
Vind je jezelf een boef?
Ja?
Waarom?
Jij zegt dat?
Now rewind 2 seconds back into that video. It said, guilt by association divides us. And that's exactly what's happening right now. In the face of terrorism, in the face of a threat to our society, we somehow choose to divide ourselves further. We choose to resort to Islamophobia. We are making Muslims feel guilty for something they didn't even do. So the questions you should be asking yourselves is, what is the right response then? How should we, as a society, respond to terrorism? What can we do when dealing with Islamophobia? Now, I'll just read the headlines here. Australians just showed the world exactly how to respond to terrorism with I'll ride with you. Now, most of you, I'm pretty sure, have heard of the Sydney siege that happened earlier this year. And though the siege itself was well covered in the media, the way Australians responded afterwards wasn't so much publicized. Now, the hashtag all started when an Australian woman saw a Muslim woman take off her hijab in fear of being identified as a Muslim after the siege was reported. She approached the Muslim woman and said, "Put it back on. I'll walk with you." She posted this on Facebook and it went viral all around Twitter. The hashtag I'll ride with you started in order for non-Muslim Australians to show their fellow Muslim Australians that they have their support, that they shouldn't be afraid to go in public, that they won't face the backlash so many has had to face, that they shouldn't be afraid to be Muslim. And if one hashtag can change an entire nation, if one hashtag can change an entire country, then just imagine what an entire country can do to the world. Because Islamophobia, unlike so many issues that we face today, is so easily solved. The solution is staring at us dead in the face. All the tools that we need are in our hands. We just seem to refuse to use them. Because at the core of it all it takes is for you to speak out, for you to put some responsibility onto your shoulders and take action, to educate people that terrorism is no representation of Islam. And in much the same way, we already accept that the Westboro Baptist Church, who walk around condemning people to hell for being homosexual and saying that tsunamis and earthquakes are a blessing from a higher being, is no representation of Christianity or any branch of it. So I ask myself this again and again, why am I up here talking to you about how bad Islamophobia has become when it can be solved just like that? So in the name of overcoming Islamophobia, in the name of reaching that very feasible goal of religious and social peace, I want to end with a quote from Dalai Lama. "However the tea is prepared, the primary ingredient is always water. While we can live without tea, we cannot live without water. Likewise, we may be born without religion, but we are not born free from the need for compassion." And that just might be the key word that we need to not only overcome a spreading and very much toxic social pandemic, but to also realize that when dealing with Islamophobia, anyone and everyone can be a hero. Thank you.